Three capitals in 2 years of war: Bucharest, Sofia, Belgrade. No other commander in the anti-Hitler coalition could boast such a result. Marshal Fyodor Tolbukhin liberated more European capitals than Zhukov and Konev combined. But why has his name been overshadowed by his more famous colleagues? What does history hide about the most successful liberator of Europe? Today, we will tell the truth about a forgotten hero whose victories changed the map of the continent. Subscribe to our channel to learn more about the forgotten heroes of history. And tell us in the comments, do you think it's fair that Tolbukhin's name was overshadowed by Zhukov and Konev, despite his outstanding achievements? Fyodor Ivanovich Tolbukhin was born on June 16, 1895, in the small village of Androniki in the Yaroslavl province. His father, Ivan Andreevich, was a simple peasant, and his mother, Alexandra Ivanovna, was a housewife and raised the children. The family lived modestly, like most peasant families of that time, but his parents strove to give their children at least a basic education. From an early age, the boy was distinguished by his curiosity and thirst for knowledge. There was no school in the village, so he received his first lessons in literacy from the local priest. Even then, it was clear that Fyodor had extraordinary abilities for learning. His parents decided to send him to the city to receive a more serious education. In 1910, the 15-year-old Tolbukhin enrolled in the Petrograd Commercial School. It was a big deal for a farmer's son to get an education in the capital of the Russian Empire. Studying came easily to him, especially mathematics and history. He proved himself to be a diligent and determined student who not only mastered the curriculum, but also studied additional subjects on his own. While studying in Petrograd, the future marshal encountered the revolutions of 1905 for the first time. Student unrest, strikes, demonstrations, all this shaped his worldview. He saw how ordinary people fought for their rights and how the authorities responded to this struggle. These impressions remained in his memory forever. After graduating from college in 1914, Tolbukhin worked as an accountant in Petrograd. But his quiet life as a counter clerk did not last long. World War I began, which radically changed the fate of millions of Russians, including the young Fyodor Tolbukhin. In January 1915, he was drafted into the army. His military service began in a reserve regiment, where he underwent initial training. Quickly attracting the attention of his commanders with his literacy and discipline, Tolbukhin was sent to the Oranienbaum School for Ensigns. This was the beginning of his path to becoming a military commander. After graduating from the school, he received the rank of ensign and was sent to the front as part of the 12th Ural Infantry Regiment. The young officer faced the realities of war for the first time: trenches, artillery fire, attacks, and retreats. He proved himself to be a skilled tactician and a cool-headed commander who cared for his subordinates. The war became Tolbukhin's first serious school of military affairs. He studied not only tactics and strategy, but also the psychology of battle, learning to understand the mood of his soldiers and see the big picture of the battle. These skills would become the foundation of his future victories. The February Revolution of 1917 found Ensign Tolbukhin at the front. The Tsarist army was disintegrating before his eyes. Soldiers were deserting, officers were being killed or expelled, and regiments were disbanding. In these chaotic conditions, the young officer made a choice that would determine the rest of his life. He decided to stay with the people and join the Red Army. In May 1918, Fyodor Tolbukhin voluntarily joined the ranks of the Red Army. He was appointed company commander in the 1st Western Regiment. The Civil War was just beginning, and the country was in dire need of experienced military leaders. Former Tsarist officers who had defected to the Soviet side became the backbone of the new army's command structure. The first battles showed that Tolbukhin had not lost his military skills, but on the contrary, had acquired new ones. He was able to find common ground with the Red commanders, who came from the ranks of workers and peasants, and at the same time use his officer experience to improve the combat effectiveness of the units. Within a few months, he was appointed battalion commander. On the Eastern Front, fighting against Admiral Kolchak's troops, Tolbukhin demonstrated his abilities as an independent tactician for the first time. His battalion was distinguished by its high discipline and combat effectiveness. The soldiers respected their commander for his fairness, concern for people, and competent leadership in battle. He never spared himself and never demanded of his subordinates what he could not do himself. Tolbukhin's talent was particularly evident during the battles near Tsaritsyn in 1919. The city was of key strategic importance, as it was located on the railway line connecting the center of the country with the south. The White Army, under the command of General Denikin, tried to capture Tsaritsyn at any cost. In one of the decisive battles, Tolbukhin's battalion found itself at the very center of the White Army's attack. The enemy outnumbered the Reds and had superior weaponry, but the soldiers' skillful tactics and steadfastness allowed them not only to repel the attack, but also to launch a counterattack. For this battle, Tolbukhin was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, one of the first Soviet military awards. After the victory at Tsaritsyn, he was appointed regimental commander. By this time, it had become clear that Tolbukhin was an experienced and talented military leader for the Red Army. He combined the professional training of a Tsarist officer with revolutionary enthusiasm and devotion to the new government. During the battles with Wrangel's forces in Crimea, Tolbukhin finally established himself as a commander of large military units. His regiment took part in the assault on Perekop, one of the bloodiest operations of the Civil War. Skillfully applying the tactics of encirclement maneuvers and coordinating actions with neighboring units, Tolbukhin made a significant contribution to the defeat of the last large White Guard group. After the end of the Civil War, the young Soviet Republic faced the task of creating a regular peacetime army. Tolbukhin, as one of the most capable commanders, was assigned to staff work. In 1922, he was sent to serve at the headquarters of the Moscow Military District as Assistant Chief of the Operations Department. Staff work required completely different skills than commanding in combat conditions. It was necessary to study military theory, analyze the experience of the World War, and develop plans for the country's defense. Tolbukhin immersed himself in this activity. He understood that modern warfare was radically different from the battles he had fought during the Civil War. The future marshal paid particular attention to studying the experience of World War I. He analyzed operations on the Western Front and studied the use of new types of weapons: tanks, aircraft, and chemical weapons. Even then, Tolbukhin understood that future wars would be massive operations involving huge armies and complex technology. In 1924, Tolbukhin was sent to study at the Frunze Military Academy of the Red Army. This was the country's highest military educational institution, where top-level commanders were trained. The course lasted 3 years and included the study of strategy, tactics, military history, economics, and politics. At the academy, Tolbukhin proved to be one of the best students. His thesis was devoted to the analysis of offensive operations and received the highest marks. Teachers noted his ability to analyze military problems in depth and find non-standard solutions. After graduating from the academy in 1927, he was appointed to the General Staff of the Red Army. Working in the General Staff allowed Tolbukhin to study military planning at the highest level. He participated in the development of defense plans for the western borders of the USSR and studied the possibilities of using new types of weapons. At that time, the Red Army was undergoing active modernization. Tank and aviation units were being created, and artillery was being improved. In 1930, Tolbukhin was appointed Chief of Staff of the Rifle Corps in the North Caucasus Military District. This was his first major command position after graduating from the academy. The Corps was stationed in a difficult mountainous region, which required special knowledge of mountain warfare tactics. Tolbukhin actively studied the peculiarities of combat operations in the mountains and organized exercises to practice specific combat techniques in difficult terrain. Under his leadership, the Corps achieved a high level of combat readiness. The district command highly appreciated his work. In the mid-1930s, the USSR began a large-scale modernization of its armed forces. New branches of the military were created, and modern equipment was introduced. Tolbukhin closely followed these processes and tried to implement innovations in his subordinate units. He understood that future warfare would require commanders to be familiar with the most modern methods of combat. On June 22, 1941, Nazi Germany's attack on the USSR found Colonel Tolbukhin in the position of Chief of Staff of the Transcaucasian Military District. The war came as a surprise to many Soviet commanders, but not to him. Several months before the attack, he had participated in the development of plans to defend the southern borders of the Soviet Union. The Transcaucasus was of strategic importance. It was home to the country's most important oil fields, and the routes to Iran and Turkey passed through this region. The German command planned to capture the Caucasian oil, without which the Reich's war machine could not function for long. Tolbukhin understood the importance of holding this region. The first months of the war brought heavy defeats for the Red Army. German troops advanced rapidly deep into Soviet territory, surrounding and destroying entire armies. In the south, the enemy was pushing towards Rostov-on-Don and further into the Caucasus. In these critical conditions, every experienced military commander was worth his weight in gold. In August 1941, Tolbukhin was appointed commander of the 57th Separate Army, which was formed to defend Crimea. This was his first appointment as army commander in combat conditions. The army consisted of units evacuated from Odessa and new formations. The defense of Crimea was the first serious test for Tolbukhin as commander of a large unit. The peninsula was of great strategic importance. From here, the enemy could threaten the Caucasus and disrupt maritime communications in the Black Sea. German-Romanian troops under the command of General Manstein were preparing to storm Crimea. Tolbukhin understood that it was practically impossible to hold the entire Crimea with the forces at his disposal. He decided to organize the defense on pre-prepared lines, using the features of the terrain. The main position was the Ishun Isthmus, a narrow strip of land between Sivash and the Black Sea. The defense was prepared in a short time. Tolbukhin personally supervised the construction of defensive structures, the placement of artillery, and the creation of reserves. He demanded that his subordinates make maximum use of engineering capabilities to strengthen their positions. Each section of the defense was carefully targeted by artillery. The enemy offensive began in September 1941. The Germans threw 2 armies and a Romanian mountain division into battle. Despite their multiple superiority in forces, the enemy met with stubborn resistance. Soviet troops under the command of Tolbukhin held their prepared positions for more than 2 months. Particularly fierce fighting took place in the area around the city of Armyansk. Tolbukhin skillfully maneuvered his reserves, transferring them to the most threatened areas. He was constantly on the front line, personally directing the defense of key positions. The soldiers saw their commander in the most dangerous places and fought with particular tenacity. In the spring of 1942, the situation of the Red Army remained critical. German troops were preparing for a new offensive in the southern direction. Operation Blue planned to capture Stalingrad and break through to the oil fields of the Caucasus. Experienced military leaders capable of organizing an effective defense were needed to counter this threat. In May 1942, Lieutenant General Tolbukhin was appointed commander of the 57th Army of the Stalingrad Front. This army was defending the southern part of the city, covering the approaches to the Volga from the Kalmyk steppes. The army's positions were crucial for the defense of the entire Stalingrad sector. Tolbukhin immediately began studying the terrain and organizing the defense. The steppe terrain did not provide natural boundaries for defense, so artificial obstacles had to be created. Under his leadership, anti-tank ditches, minefields, and firing points were built. Particular attention was paid to air defense, as German aircraft dominated the skies. The German offensive on Stalingrad began at the end of August 1942. General Paulus's 6th Army and Gota's 4th Panzer Army struck from the north and south, seeking to encircle the city's defenders. Tolbukhin's 57th Army met the main blow of the enemy's southern group. The fighting in Tolbukhin's army sector was particularly fierce. German tanks broke through the Soviet defenses but met with stubborn resistance. Tolbukhin skillfully used anti-tank artillery and aviation to repel tank attacks. He constantly coordinated his actions with neighboring armies, preventing a breach in the front. During the critical days of September, when the Germans broke through to the Volga and captured most of the city, Tolbukhin's army continued to hold its positions south of Stalingrad. This was of great importance for the overall defense. The enemy could not use all its forces to storm the city, being forced to keep significant reserves against Tolbukhin's army. The 57th Army played a particularly important role in the preparation of the Soviet counteroffensive. Tolbukhin participated in the planning of Operation Uranus, which envisaged the encirclement of the enemy's Stalingrad group. His army was to strike from the south, closing the encirclement. On November 19, 1942, the historic counteroffensive began near Stalingrad. Tolbukhin's army broke through the German defenses and rushed to meet the troops of the Southwestern Front. 4 days later, the encirclement was complete, trapping 22 enemy divisions in a cauldron. Tolbukhin proved himself not only as a talented defender, but also as a skilled organizer of offensive operations. He skillfully used tank and mechanized units and ensured coordination between the different branches of the military. His army made a significant contribution to the defeat of the German forces at Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point not only in the war, but also in Tolbukhin's career. He proved himself to be a high-class commander, capable of solving the most complex operational tasks. For his outstanding achievements in the Battle of Stalingrad, he was awarded the Order of Suvorov First Class. The success at Stalingrad brought Lieutenant General Tolbukhin well-deserved recognition among the country's top military leadership. In February 1943, he was appointed commander of the Southern Front, which was created to develop an offensive in the direction of Rostov-on-Don and liberate the Donbas. This appointment was an important milestone in his military career. The Southern Front included several combined arms armies, tank and mechanized corps, and aviation units. Managing such a large formation required not only military knowledge, but also high-level organizational skills. Tolbukhin brilliantly coped with this task, demonstrating his talent as a commander of strategic scale. The first major operation under his command was the offensive in the Rostov direction. German troops had created a powerful defense along the Mius and Moloknaya rivers using natural boundaries and long-term fortifications. Breaking through such positions required careful preparation and coordination of all branches of the military. Tolbukhin studied the enemy's defense system in detail, organized air and ground reconnaissance, and planned the use of artillery and aviation. He understood that the success of the operation depended on surprise and the massive use of firepower. Preparations for the offensive were carried out in strict secrecy. The breakthrough of the Mius line began on February 18, 1943. After a powerful artillery barrage, rifle divisions supported by tanks and assault aircraft went on the attack. The Germans put up stubborn resistance, but were unable to withstand the onslaught of the Soviet troops. The front's tank units distinguished themselves, which Tolbukhin skillfully used to turn tactical success into operational success. The tankers broke through deep into the enemy's defenses, disrupting their communications and creating the threat of encirclement. The German units were forced to abandon their pre-prepared positions. After a week of fierce fighting, the troops of the Southern Front advanced 70 kilometers and liberated several towns and villages. The success of the operation was achieved thanks to competent planning and clear coordination between all branches of the armed forces. Tolbukhin proved himself a master of modern combined arms warfare. In April 1943, the Southern Front was renamed the Fourth Ukrainian Front. This renaming reflected the new tasks of the Union: the liberation of Ukraine and access to the state border of the USSR. Tolbukhin headed one of the four Ukrainian fronts, which underscored his high status among Soviet military leaders. In the summer of 1943, during the Battle of Kursk, the Fourth Ukrainian Front performed an important strategic task. It tied down large enemy forces on the southern section of the front, preventing the German command from transferring reserves to Kursk. Tolbukhin organized a series of demonstrative actions and private operations that forced the enemy to keep significant forces there. After the victory at Kursk, the Red Army launched a general offensive. The Fourth Ukrainian Front was tasked with liberating Donbas, the country's most important industrial region. Tolbukhin understood not only the military, but also the economic significance of this operation for the restoration of the USSR's national economy. In the fall of 1943, the troops of the Fourth Ukrainian Front, under Tolbukhin's command, launched a decisive offensive to liberate the Donbas. This operation was of enormous strategic importance. The industrial potential of the region was vital for the restoration of the USSR's military production. The Germans understood the importance of this area and created a powerful defense here. The German fortification system in Donbas included several defensive lines based on industrial facilities, mine slag heaps, and populated areas. The enemy turned every mine into a fortress, using underground workings for covert troop maneuvers. Breaking through such defenses required unconventional solutions. Tolbukhin carefully studied the features of the terrain, and the nature of the enemy's fortifications. He enlisted the help of former miners who knew the location of underground communications in planning the operation. Particular attention was paid to the use of engineering troops and captured equipment to reinforce the assault groups. The offensive began on August 13, 1943, simultaneously in several directions. The main strike was directed towards Taganrog, with the aim of reaching the Sea of Azov and cutting off the enemy's Donbass group from the rest of its forces. Auxiliary strikes were intended to tie down German reserves. The fighting in the Donbass was particularly fierce. The Germans clung to every settlement, realizing that the loss of this region would deprive them of vital resources. Soviet troops advanced slowly but steadily, liberating one city after another. Every mine and every factory was taken by force. Particularly, heavy fighting broke out for the city of Stalino, now Donetsk. The enemy turned industrial facilities into centers of resistance, using factory workshops to set up firing points. Tolbukhin organized a methodical assault on the city, using massive artillery and aviation to suppress enemy positions. On September 8, 1943, Stalino was liberated. This was a turning point in the Donbass operation. Having lost its main stronghold, the German defense began to collapse. Tolbukhin's tank units broke through to operational depth, threatening to encircle the entire enemy group in the Donbass. By the end of September, the front's troops had reached the Sea of Azov, cutting off the enemy's retreat routes. The German command was forced to begin a hasty evacuation of its troops from the Donbass. Many units did not have time to retreat in an organized manner and suffered heavy losses from Soviet airstrikes and partisans. The liberation of the Donbass was completed in early October 1943. In 2 months of offensive operations, Tolbukhin's troops advanced 250 kilometers and liberated an area of about 60,000 square kilometers. Hundreds of mines and dozens of plants and factories fell into the hands of the Red Army. The success of the Donbass operation brought Tolbukhin widespread recognition. He was awarded the Order of Kutuzov, First Class, and on September 28, 1943, he was promoted to Colonel General. In military circles, he came to be known as one of the best front commanders of the Red Army. After the liberation of Donbass, the Fourth Ukrainian Front was given a new task: the liberation of Crimea. The peninsula was still in enemy hands and was being used as a naval base for operations against Soviet communications in the Black Sea. In January 1944, Colonel General Tolbukhin received a new appointment as commander of the Third Ukrainian Front. This unit was to advance in the direction of the lower Dnieper and further into the Balkans. The change of fronts reflected Tolbukhin's growing authority in the Supreme Command headquarters. He was entrusted with the most responsible areas. The Third Ukrainian Front included 8 combined arms armies, a tank army, several separate corps, and a powerful air force. It was one of the largest formations of the Red Army, capable of solving large-scale strategic tasks. Commanding such a front required outstanding leadership skills. The first major operation under Tolbukhin's command was the crossing of the Dnieper River in its lower reaches. The Germans had turned the river into a powerful defensive line called the Eastern Wall. The enemy hoped to stop the Red Army's advance here and stabilize the front before winter. Preparations for the crossing were carried out in strict secrecy. Tolbukhin understood that the success of the operation depended on surprise and the massive use of all types of weapons. Crossing equipment was secretly brought in, artillery was concentrated, and false concentration areas were created to disorient the enemy. The crossing of the Dnieper began on October 26, 1943, simultaneously in several places. The first echelon was transported in assault boats under the cover of powerful artillery fire. The Germans were taken aback by the scale and audacity of the Soviet enterprise. The crossing near the city of Kakhovka proved to be particularly successful. Here, Tolbukhin's troops captured a bridgehead 20 kilometers wide and up to 15 kilometers deep. German counterattacks were repelled, and tank units began to cross over to the bridgehead. By the end of November, several divisions were already stationed there. The expansion of the bridgehead continued throughout the winter. Tolbukhin methodically built up his forces on the western bank of the Dnieper, preparing for the spring offensive. The Germans made desperate attempts to eliminate the bridgehead, but the Soviet troops firmly secured their captured positions. In the spring of 1944, the decisive phase of the liberation of right bank Ukraine began. The troops of the Third Ukrainian Front launched a powerful strike from the Kakhovka bridgehead in the direction of the city of Nikolaev. The enemy was unable to withstand the onslaught and began a hasty retreat to the lower reaches of the Dniester. During the month-long offensive, Tolbukhin's troops advanced 200 kilometers, liberated Nikolaev and Kherson, and reached the Black Sea in the Odessa area. The German defenses in southern Ukraine were finally broken. The way to the Balkans was open. On April 10, 1944, the front's troops stormed Odessa, the largest port on the Black Sea. The liberation of the city was of enormous strategic importance. It restored the USSR's maritime communications and created a base for further operations in Romania. The successes of the Third Ukrainian Front opened up new opportunities for the Soviet command. The Balkan Peninsula, with its oil fields and strategic communications, became the next target. Tolbukhin was preparing for a fundamentally new type of operation: the liberation of territories belonging to states allied with the USSR. In the summer of 1944, the troops of the Third Ukrainian Front, under Tolbukhin's command, were preparing for an operation that would change the balance of power in the Balkans. The plan was to strike Romanian and German troops in the area between the Prut and Dniester rivers, break through to the Romanian border, and force Romania to withdraw from the war. Romania was Germany's most important ally in the Balkans. Its oil fields supplied fuel to the German war machine, and its army had been fighting against the USSR since the first days of the war. Romania's withdrawal from the war would deprive Germany of significant resources and open the way for Soviet troops to enter Central Europe. The planning of the Iasi-Kishinev operation was carried out in close cooperation with Marshal Malinovsky's Second Ukrainian Front. The two fronts were to launch concentric strikes on the flanks of the enemy group and encircle it in the Kishinev area. Tolbukhin was to command the southern strike group. Preparation for the operation required maximum secrecy. The enemy was not to be allowed to guess the scale of the impending offensive. Tolbukhin organized a complex system of disinformation, creating false areas of troop concentration and simulating preparations for defense in certain sections of the front. Particular attention was paid to studying the political situation in Romania. Tolbukhin understood that military operations on the territory of Germany's ally would require a special approach to the local population. It was necessary not only to defeat the enemy troops, but also to persuade Romania to change its political orientation. The offensive began on August 20, 1944, with powerful artillery preparation. Tolbukhin concentrated a huge number of guns and mortars on the main strike direction. Artillery fire was directed at pre-reconnoitered targets and had a devastating effect. The enemy's defenses were breached on the very first day of the operation. The front's tank units rushed into the gaps that had formed, turning tactical success into operational success. By the end of the day, the advanced units had advanced 30 kilometers, breaking through the entire enemy defense system. The Romanian troops were unable to withstand the onslaught of the Soviet forces. Many units began to surrender or scatter. German units attempted to organize resistance, but were forced to retreat under pressure from the superior enemy forces. On August 24th, Soviet troops closed the encirclement in the Chisinau area. 18 German and Romanian divisions, about 200,000 men, were trapped in the cauldron. Attempts by the enemy to break through the encirclement were repelled. The elimination of the encircled group began. The success of the Iasi-Chisinau operation had far-reaching political consequences. On August 23rd, a coup d'état took place in Bucharest. King Michael arrested dictator Antonescu and announced Romania's withdrawal from the war. The country not only ceased resistance, but also declared war on Germany. The road to Bucharest was open. Tolbukhin's troops advanced rapidly through Romania without encountering serious resistance. The local population welcomed the Soviet troops as liberators from German rule. On August 31st, the advanced units of the front entered the Romanian capital. Tolbukhin personally accepted the surrender of the Romanian troops and oversaw the establishment of Soviet military administration in Bucharest. He proved himself not only as a talented military leader, but also as a diplomat who was able to establish relations with the new Romanian government and ensure the country's transition to the anti-Hitler coalition. After the successful completion of the Romanian campaign, the troops of the Third Ukrainian Front faced a new task: the liberation of Bulgaria. This Balkan country was formally at war with the USSR, but its participation in the fighting was minimal. Bulgarian troops were used mainly to occupy Greek and Yugoslav territories. The political situation in Bulgaria was radically different from that in Romania. The Bulgarian people traditionally sympathized with Russia, and participation in the war against the USSR was extremely unpopular. There was a powerful partisan movement in the country, and government circles were increasingly in favor of withdrawing from the war. Tolbukhin understood the specifics of the Bulgarian campaign. Here, political methods were needed to solve the problem, rather than military ones. It was necessary to convince the Bulgarian leadership to voluntarily change its political orientation and join the anti-Hitler coalition. On September 7, 1944, frontline troops approached the Bulgarian border. On the same day, an anti-fascist coup took place in Sofia. The Fatherland Front government came to power and immediately announced its break with Germany and its readiness to cooperate with the Soviet Union. On September 8th, the USSR declared war on Bulgaria. But on September 9th, the new Bulgarian government capitulated and declared war on Germany. Such a rapid change in political orientation was unprecedented in history. Within 24 hours, Bulgaria had gone from being an enemy to an ally of the Soviet Union. Tolbukhin's troops entered Bulgarian territory not as conquerors, but as liberators and allies. Bulgarian units did not resist, and in many cases joined the Soviet troops to fight against the Germans. The Red Army had never encountered such a reception during the entire war. The advance through Bulgaria resembled a triumphal march rather than a military operation. The local population held solemn meetings for the Soviet troops, decorating the streets with red flags and portraits of Stalin. In many cities and villages, public celebrations were organized to mark the liberation. On September 12th, the advanced units of the Third Ukrainian Front entered Sofia without a fight. The Bulgarian capital welcomed the Soviet troops as long-awaited liberators. Thousands of people gathered in the streets of the city, greeting the Red Army soldiers with flowers and national songs. Tolbukhin personally reviewed the parade of Soviet troops in the center of Sofia. It was the first time in the history of the Great Patriotic War that a Soviet commander held a victory parade in the capital of a former enemy that had become an ally. The symbolic significance of this event cannot be overestimated. A distinctive feature of the Bulgarian campaign was that the liberation of the country took place with virtually no bloodshed. The Red Army's losses amounted to only a few dozen people, most of whom died in traffic accidents. Not a single serious battle took place on Bulgarian territory. After establishing control over Bulgaria, Tolbukhin began organizing joint operations with Bulgarian troops against German forces in Yugoslavia and Greece. Bulgarian units were rearmed with Soviet weapons and incorporated into the front to participate in further operations. The successful resolution of the Bulgarian question further strengthened Tolbukhin's authority as a commander capable of solving not only military, but also complex political and diplomatic tasks. His actions in Bulgaria became a model of combining military art with political wisdom. The liberation of Bulgaria opened the way for Tolbukhin's troops to Yugoslavia, where one of the most difficult campaigns of the Great Patriotic War unfolded. Unlike Romania and Bulgaria, here the Red Army had to operate in the conditions of a long-standing civil war between various Yugoslav factions and the German occupiers. The political situation in Yugoslavia was extremely complicated. The country was occupied by Axis forces and divided between Germany, Italy, Hungary, and the puppet Croatian state. Two main resistance movements fought against the occupiers: the communist partisans of Josip Broz Tito and the nationalist Chetniks of Dragoljub Mihailovich. The Soviet command decided to support Tito's partisans, who controlled significant territories and were actively fighting against the Germans. Establishing contact with the Yugoslav communists and coordinating joint actions became the most important tasks for Tolbukhin. At the end of September 1944, troops of the Third Ukrainian Front, reinforced by Bulgarian units, launched an offensive in Yugoslavia. The main objective of the operation was to liberate Belgrade, the country's capital and a key strategic hub in the Balkans. German troops in Yugoslavia, under the command of Field Marshal Wyss, established a powerful defense on the approaches to Belgrade. The enemy used the mountainous and wooded terrain to create a staggered system of fortifications. Every hill and every village was turned into a stronghold of resistance. A distinctive feature of the Yugoslav campaign was the close cooperation between Soviet troops and Tito's partisan detachments. The partisans knew the terrain well, had the support of the population, and were able to operate behind enemy lines. Tolbukhin organized effective cooperation between the regular army and the partisans. The offensive on Belgrade began on October 12, 1944. Soviet and Bulgarian troops attacked German positions from the north, while Yugoslav partisans struck from the south and west. This coordination of actions ensured a rapid breakthrough of enemy defenses. The battles for Belgrade were particularly fierce. The Germans understood that the loss of the Yugoslav capital would mean the collapse of their entire Balkan strategy. The enemy clung to every street and every building. Urban combat required maximum effort and skill from the Soviet troops. The interaction between the Red Army's tank units and partisan detachments played a decisive role in the storming of Belgrade. The partisans captured bridges and key facilities, holding them until the Soviet tanks arrived. This tactic made it possible to avoid the destruction of the city's most important structures. On October 20th, 1944, Belgrade was completely liberated. Tolbukhin personally met with Marshal Tito and other leaders of the Yugoslav partisans. This meeting marked the beginning of close military and political cooperation between the USSR and Yugoslavia. The liberation of Belgrade was of enormous strategic importance. German troops were forced to leave a significant part of Yugoslavia and retreat to pre-prepared lines. The enemy's Balkan group was divided, which facilitated further Allied operations. The success of the Belgrade operation finally confirmed Tolbukhin's reputation as an outstanding commander of his time. He demonstrated his ability to conduct combat operations in the most difficult political and geographical conditions, successfully coordinating the actions of regular troops with the partisan movement. By the fall of 1944, Colonel General Tolbukhin had established himself as one of the most talented Soviet military leaders. His command style was distinguished by a number of characteristics that set him apart from other front commanders. First and foremost, it was his ability to combine strategic thinking with attention to tactical details. Unlike many of his colleagues, Tolbukhin never sought spectacular but risky operations. His approach to planning combat operations was characterized by particular thoroughness and calculation. Each operation was prepared with maximum consideration of all factors, from the state of the troops to the political situation in the area of upcoming operations. Tolbukhin was a master of the preparatory phase of operations. He paid great attention to reconnaissance, engineering preparation, and logistical support. Under his leadership, the front headquarters became a well-oiled machine capable of solving the most complex tasks of planning and commanding troops. A distinctive feature of Tolbukhin's military talent was his ability to find unconventional solutions in complex situations. He never followed the beaten path, but sought ways of acting that could take the enemy by surprise. At the same time, his innovation was always combined with a deep knowledge of military theory and practice. In the field of tactics, Tolbukhin was a recognized master of organizing cooperation between different branches of the military. His operations were distinguished by the precise coordination of infantry, artillery, tanks, and aviation. He was able to create decisive superiority in forces and resources in the direction of the main strike. Tolbukhin proved himself to be an outstanding organizer of river crossings. Under his leadership, crossings were successfully carried out across such major rivers as the Dnieper, Danube, and Tisa. He developed an original method of preparing and conducting river crossings, which was then used by other fronts. Unlike some Soviet commanders, Tolbukhin always sought to minimize the losses of his troops. He preferred to achieve victory not by numbers, but by skill. Careful preparation of operations, the massive use of artillery and aviation, and competent maneuvering all allowed him to achieve success with relatively few losses. Tolbukhin possessed a quality rare for a military commander of his rank: the ability to work with allies. His successful cooperation with Romanian, Bulgarian, and Yugoslav troops was based on a deep understanding of the political specifics of each country and respect for the national characteristics of his allies. Tolbukhin based his command of the troops on the principles of clarity and consistency. His orders were always specific and unambiguous. He demanded that his subordinates carry out their tasks precisely, but at the same time gave commanders the necessary autonomy in choosing how to accomplish them. On a personal level, Tolbukhin was a modest and thrifty man. He did not like ostentatious luxury, preferring simplicity in everyday life. Soldiers and officers respected him for his fairness and concern for people. He never demanded from his subordinates what he was not prepared to do himself. By the end of 1944, Tolbukhin was rightly considered one of the best front commanders of the Red Army. His name was on a par with those of Zhukov, Konev, and Rokossovsky. However, unlike his more famous colleagues, he specialized in liberation operations in Allied countries, which required special qualities as a commander and diplomat. On September 12, 1944, Colonel General Tolbukhin was awarded the title of Marshal of the Soviet Union. This highest military rank was awarded to him for his outstanding services in the liberation of Romania and Bulgaria. By this time, he had become one of the youngest marshals in the history of the Red Army, which underscored the exceptional nature of his military talents. The awarding of the marshal's rank meant not only recognition of military merit, but also the assignment of new, more responsible tasks. Tolbukhin became not just a front commander, but one of the leaders of Soviet military policy in the Balkans. He had to resolve issues that went far beyond purely military problems. The winter of 1944 to 1945 was spent preparing for the final operations of the war in Europe. The troops of the Third Ukrainian Front were preparing for an offensive in Hungary aimed at liberating Budapest and reaching the borders of Austria. This campaign required particularly careful preparation. The Hungarian operation was exceptionally complex. The Germans had concentrated large forces there, including elite SS tank divisions. The terrain favored the defending side. Numerous rivers, lakes, and swamps created natural obstacles for the advancing troops. Tolbukhin approached the planning of the Hungarian campaign with particular responsibility. He understood that failure here could prolong the war and lead to unnecessary casualties. Therefore, preparations were carried out with the utmost care. The terrain was studied, material resources were accumulated, and coordination between different branches of the armed forces was worked out. The Hungarian campaign began in December 1944 and continued until April 1945. It was one of the most difficult operations of the war. German troops put up desperate resistance, realizing that defeat in Hungary would open the way for the Allies to the heart of Germany. The siege of Budapest was a particularly dramatic episode of the campaign. The German command declared the Hungarian capital a fortress and ordered it to be held at all costs. Urban fighting continued for more than 2 months. Tolbukhin organized a methodical assault on the city, applying the experience gained during the liberation of other European capitals. On February 13, 1945, Budapest was completely liberated. It was the third European capital taken by troops under Tolbukhin's command. After Bucharest and Sofia, it was the turn of the Hungarian capital. No other Soviet commander could boast such a result. The liberation of Budapest did not mean the end of the Hungarian campaign. The Germans launched their last major counteroffensive of the war in an attempt to recapture their lost positions. Operation Spring Awakening was the last attempt by German troops to change the course of the war on the Eastern Front. Tolbukhin brilliantly repelled this offensive, demonstrating supreme command skills. He not only withstood the onslaught of superior enemy forces, but also organized a powerful counteroffensive that led to the complete defeat of the German group in Hungary. After the completion of the Hungarian operation, Tolbukhin's troops were given a new task: to advance into Austria and liberate Vienna. The Austrian campaign was the last major operation of the Third Ukrainian Front in the Great Patriotic War. On April 13, 1945, Soviet troops entered the Austrian capital. The liberation of Vienna completed Tolbukhin's brilliant series of victories. In 2 years, he liberated 4 European capitals: Bucharest, Sofia, Belgrade, and Vienna. This was an absolute record among all the commanders of the anti-Hitler coalition. No other general of the Allied armies could boast such achievements. But military successes were only one aspect of Tolbukhin's activities in the Balkans. His role as a diplomat and politician was no less important. He participated in negotiations with the governments of the liberated countries, helped establish new state power, and coordinated the actions of various political forces. Tolbukhin proved himself to be a subtle diplomat, able to find common ground with a wide variety of political figures. He successfully cooperated with communists and social democrats, monarchists and republicans, military and civilian figures. Such flexibility was necessary in the complex political situation of the post-war Balkans. His role in creating new armed forces for the liberated countries was especially important. Under his leadership, the national armies of Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Yugoslavia were formed. These armies were supposed to be the backbone of the new democratic regime's defense and guarantee their independence. Tolbukhin understood that military victory was only the first step toward establishing lasting peace. It was necessary to create a system of states in the Balkans that were friendly to the USSR and capable of independently ensuring their own security and development. This task required no less effort than military operations. Despite his outstanding military achievements and brilliant victories, Marshal Tolbukhin's name was overshadowed in the post-war years by his more famous colleagues, Zhukov and Konev. The reasons for this paradox lie in a complex intertwining of political, personal, and historical factors that determined the fate of military reputations in the Soviet Union. First and foremost, geography played a role. Zhukov became famous for defending Moscow and capturing Berlin, events that had symbolic significance for the Soviet people. Konev distinguished himself in the battles for Ukraine and also participated in the storming of the German capital. Tolbukhin, on the other hand, operated in the Balkans, which was perceived as secondary in the minds of the Soviet people. The liberation of European capitals, Bucharest, Sofia, Belgrade, Budapest, Vienna, was undoubtedly an important achievement. However, in post-war Soviet historiography, these victories were overshadowed by the capture of Berlin, which was seen as the main symbol of victory over fascism. The Balkan campaigns were perceived as auxiliary operations. Tolbukhin's personal qualities played a significant role. Unlike Zhukov, who was a tough and authoritarian man, or Konev, who was ambitious, Tolbukhin was modest and did not seek publicity. He never imposed himself on the country's leadership and did not participate in post-war intrigues. After the war, Soviet military leaders split into several groups, vying for influence and honors. Zhukov headed one of the most influential groups, Konev another. Tolbukhin stayed out of this struggle, which deprived him of powerful patrons in the highest echelons of power. Stalin's policy toward military personnel was also an important factor. The leader feared the excessive elevation of individual military leaders and deliberately limited their popularity. Zhukov and Konev were too well known to be completely overshadowed, but Tolbukhin did not enjoy such popularity among the general public. Stalin valued Tolbukhin precisely for his modesty and loyalty. The Marshal never claimed to be a national hero and did not seek political activity. This made him convenient for the authorities, but at the same time did not contribute to the growth of his public fame. After Stalin's death in 1953, a struggle for power began between his successors. Zhukov actively participated in political intrigues, supporting Khrushchev against Beria. Konev also played an important role in these events. Tolbukhin died in 1949 and could not influence the post-Stalin processes. The time factor was significant. Zhukov and Konev lived long lives and managed to write memoirs, give interviews, and share their memories. Tolbukhin died in his prime, leaving no detailed notes about his military activities. His voice was not heard in the post-war discussions about the war. During the Khrushchev period, when criticism of Stalin's cult of personality began, special attention was paid to those military leaders who had suffered repression or conflicted with the leader. Zhukov was removed from command by Stalin and exiled to the provinces, which gave him the aura of a martyr. Tolbukhin never clashed with Stalin and was not disgraced. Soviet historical science also played a role in shaping military reputations. Historians paid more attention to the main fronts, the Western and First Belarusian, commanded by Zhukov and Konev. The Balkan operations were studied in less detail and did not receive as much coverage in academic literature. Finally, geopolitical factors played a role. In the context of the Cold War, Tolbukhin's successes in the Balkans took on a dual significance. On the one hand, he created a pro-Soviet bloc in southeastern Europe. But on the other hand, the conflict with Yugoslavia and the problems in Hungary in 1956 cast a shadow over his legacy. Marshal Fyodor Ivanovich Tolbukhin died on October 17, 1949, at the age of 54. His death was a great loss for the Soviet armed forces and personally for Stalin, who held this talented military leader in high esteem. The Marshal's funeral was held with the highest state honors, and his urn was placed in the Kremlin wall. During 4 years of war, Tolbukhin rose from army commander to Marshal of the Soviet Union, liberated 4 European capitals, and defeated dozens of enemy divisions. His troops liberated hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of territory, home to millions of people. Such achievements place him among the greatest commanders in history. Tolbukhin's military legacy is multifaceted and significant. He made an important contribution to the development of the theory and practice of modern military art. His experience in organizing offensive operations, forcing water barriers, and urban combat was studied and used in the post-war years in the training of military personnel. Tolbukhin's experience in coalition warfare was particularly valuable. His ability to organize cooperation with allied armies and take into account the political characteristics of different countries became a model for military diplomats. In the era of bloc confrontation, such experience became particularly relevant. Tolbukhin left a noticeable mark on military pedagogy. Many officers who served under his command later became major military leaders. His school was distinguished by its special attention to the preparation of operations, care for people, and a combination of innovation with a deep knowledge of military affairs. After the Marshal's death, military schools, city streets, and ships were named after him. Monuments to Tolbukhin have been erected in Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, and other countries liberated by his troops. This is a recognition of his merits by the peoples for whose freedom he fought. However, the true significance of Tolbukhin's activities goes far beyond purely military achievements. He played a key role in the creation of the post-war system of international relations in Southeast Europe. Under his leadership, the foundations were laid for friendly relations between the USSR and the Balkan countries. Tolbukhin's political legacy proved to be complex and controversial. On the one hand, he helped the peoples of the Balkans to free themselves from fascist rule and create independent states. On the other hand, these states fell under the influence of the USSR, which limited their sovereignty. The events in Eastern Europe in the second half of the 20th century showed the complexity of the problems Tolbukhin faced. The events in Hungary in 1956, the break with Yugoslavia, and crises in other socialist countries were all consequences of contradictions inherent in the post-war structure of the region. Nevertheless, it cannot be denied that Tolbukhin acted within the constraints of his time and carried out the tasks set by the country's leadership. He was not a politician or an ideologue, but a professional military man who served his country honestly. His personal responsibility for the post-war problems was minimal. In modern Russia, Tolbukhin's name is gradually returning from oblivion. Historians are increasingly turning to the study of his activities, noting the undeserved obscurity of this outstanding commander. His biography is being republished, documentaries are being made about him, and articles are being written. Studying Tolbukhin's legacy is especially important for understanding the history of the Great Patriotic War. His activities show that victory was achieved through the efforts of many talented military leaders, each of whom contributed to the common cause. Focusing only on a few star marshals impoverishes our understanding of the war. The Balkan campaigns led by Tolbukhin were no less important to victory than the more famous operations on other fronts. They secured the USSR's entry into Central Europe, deprived Germany of allies and resources, and brought the end of the war closer. Without these operations, the war could have dragged on for many months. Today, when Russia is once again playing an active role in international affairs, Tolbukhin's experience is particularly relevant. His ability to combine military and diplomatic methods, take into account the interests of allies, and operate in a multinational environment can serve as a model for modern military and political figures. Marshal Tolbukhin's name should take its rightful place in the pantheon of heroes of the Great Patriotic War. He was worthy of standing alongside Zhukov, Konev, Rokossovsky, and other outstanding commanders. His contribution to the victory was no less, and in some respects even more significant than that of his more famous colleagues.